Welcome to the debate. Today, we are stepping onto the fault line that runs right beneath modern physics, biology, and, well, philosophy. We are asking a question that sounds simple at first, but it effectively dismantles almost everything we think we know about the world. Is the universe a multiplying collection of accidents? An infinite number of many worlds and gradual evolutionary slides? Or is it a single, invariant geometric structure?
Yeah, that is certainly the high-altitude view. To put it in the language of the material we have been looking at, we are essentially debating whether reality is defined by process and multiplicity, where everything happens and everything is continuous. Or, on the other hand, structure and invariance, where the universe is one closed object that doesn't multiply but creates sharp, distinct forms.
Precisely. And this isn't just about quantum mechanics, though. We will definitely start there. This tension traverses the many worlds interpretation of physics, the, I would say, evolutionary anomaly of human consciousness, and even the spectral nature of energy itself. I am taking the position of invariance, that the universe is one structure, and that our current scientific addiction to multiplying worlds and gradual emergence is just a mistake.
Right, and I naturally will take the side of the standard model and continuity. I am here to defend the robust mathematics of quantum mechanics, which suggests those many worlds are quite real. I'll also defend the evidence for gradual evolutionary mechanisms and the universality of Einstein's relativity, without, adding new topology factors to it.
Excellent. Well, let's begin with the concept of ontological inflation. I want to start with a thought experiment from our source material that I find incredibly clarifying. Imagine you flip a coin. It lands heads. You remember it landing heads. Now imagine you could return to the moment right before the flip. You stand across from your earlier self. He doesn't know the outcome, but you do.
Which is your standard time travel paradox setup.
Exactly. But notice what happens. Or rather, what doesn't happen. Nothing explodes. Why? Because the you who remembers heads and the you who hasn't flipped it yet are just different cellular structures separated by time. They are coordinate descriptions within one geometry. The paradox only exists if you think of time as a container or a library of sovereign moments. If you view reality as one invariant geometry, there is no paradox. There is just one world, described from different positions.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That coin flip, in quantum mechanics, isn't just a coordinate issue, it is a superposition. Until the environment interacts with it, the math says it is both heads and tails. And the mathematics of unitary evolution, the Schrödinger equation itself, it doesn't have a stop button. It doesn't say collapse to heads. It says the wave function continues. If the math continues, then the tails version of you must still exist. To deny that is to add an arbitrary rule that just isn't in the equations.
That is the standard defense, yes. But I am not convinced by that line of reasoning because, frankly, it confuses the map with the territory. You are assuming that because the mathematics of the wave function has orthogonal components, these branches, that reality must have orthogonal worlds. My argument is this variation reveals invariance. Just because the description splits doesn't mean the actual physical world duplicates.
I am sorry, but I just don't buy that. If I have two outcomes and they don't interact, they are orthogonal, as you say. They are effectively separate worlds. I mean, if they are causally sealed off from one another, how can you possibly claim they are part of one invariant structure? You are effectively deleting the parts of the math you don't like.
Not deleting, interpreting through the lens of geometry. Let's move into the core debate on quantum mechanics here, because this is where the meridian analogy comes in. Consider the Earth. We lay a grid over it, meridians, time zones. The grid divides the Earth into 24 zones. But does that produce 24 Earths?
Well, obviously not.
Exactly. The grid is a descriptive tool. It applies a coordinate system to one invariant object. My argument, and the argument of the source material, is that quantum branching is exactly like time zones. Decoherence is a meridian grid applied to the universal wave function. It reveals internal structure, yes, but it does not produce sovereign copies of the universe.
That is a compelling metaphor. But have you considered the causal difference? Time zones interact. If I cross a time zone, I am still on the same planet. In the many worlds interpretation, the branches do not interact. Once decoherence happens, the you who saw heads and the you who saw tails are physically cut off. If they are causally sealed, calling them one world is just playing word games. They meet every physical definition of being separate realities.
They meet the algebraic definition of orthogonality, not the geometric definition of separation. This is crucial. I want to introduce the concept of light cone ontology here. We, as observers, are not floating outside the universe looking down at a multiverse library. We are embedded threads. We are inside the manifold.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning there is no God's eye view where you can see all these branches at once. For a branch to be a world, it needs an independent space-time manifold. It needs its own gravity, its own topology. Hilbert space, where these quantum states live, is algebra. Space-time is geometry. You are making a massive category error. You are confusing a list of numbers, the algebra, with a physical place, the geometry.
I come at it from a completely different way. If the algebra describes the physical state perfectly, then the distinction you are drawing between algebra and geometry is artificial. If the math says these states exist and don't touch, then physically they are worlds. To say otherwise is to demand that reality conform to your philosophical preference for oneness.
It is not a preference, it is the Einstein move. When Einstein saw that observers disagreed on time and length, he didn't say, well, everyone lives in a different private spacetime. He asked, what is the invariant? And he found the spacetime interval. He unified the variation. Many worlds does the exact opposite. It takes variation and multiplies the universe. I am saying we need to do what Einstein did. Find the invariant wave function and stop multiplying the territory just because the index changed.
That is quite a bold claim equating your position with Einstein's methodology. But, all right, let's test this structure versus process idea in a messier field. Biology. You claim that this invariance principle applies to evolution too? Because that seems like the absolute domain of pure change.
It is. And that is exactly why the anomaly of human consciousness is so glaring. Standard evolutionary theory relies on gradualism. Nature doesn't make jumps. And yet, when we look at humans, we see a massive discontinuity.
I completely dispute the premise that it is a discontinuity. We see tool use in chimps. We see complex song in whales. We see social hierarchies in wolves. Humans are just an amplification of those traits. It is a gradient, not a cliff.
That is an interesting point, though I would frame it differently based on the material. Look at the data on behavioral template preservation. This is fascinating. Look at dogs. We have bred them for 15,000 years. We have changed their shape from Chihuahuas to Great Danes. But behaviorally, they are still wolves. They form packs, they mark territory, they understand hierarchy.
Sure, because genetics creates behavioral tendencies. That is not controversial.
But look at the pattern. Cats behave like lions. Birds retain reptilian display rituals. The behavioral architecture is preserved even when the physical form changes wildly. Evolution preserves the template. Now look at humans. We do not behave like enhanced apes.
Oh, I heavily disagree with that. We have hierarchies, we have aggression, we have tribalism. That is very ape-like.
Those are biological drives. I am talking about our structural organization. An ape uses a stick to get termites. That is learned behavior. A human creates a legal code. That is a symbolic, normative system. We don't just communicate. We create entities that do not exist physically, like justice or the state, and we organize our lives around them. That is not a better stick. That is a completely different operating system.
I think you are falling into the trap of human exceptionalism here. This sounds exactly like a phase transition to me. Think about water. You cool it down, it is liquid, liquid, liquid. And then suddenly, at 0 degrees, it is ice. It is a hard snap, a discontinuity, but it is caused by the exact same underlying laws of thermodynamics. Human culture is likely just a complexity threshold. We got enough neurons, and boom, symbolic thought emerged.
Emergence. That is the magic word we use when we don't have a mechanism. You say complexity threshold, but that is a black box. How does adding more neurons create the capacity for normativity, for ought instead of is?
Why did the mechanism that strictly preserves wolf behavior in dogs fail so completely in us? Why are we the only species where the template shattered?
Perhaps because we are the only species that developed complex language. Language is the feedback loop. Once you have symbols, you can disconnect from the immediate physical environment. It doesn't require a miracle or a structural break. It just requires a new software layer.
But that is exactly my point. Where did the software come from? Evolution explains the hardware. It explains the physical variation. It does not explain the origin of a symbolic system that can track truth independent of survival. To say it emerged is just to label the mystery, not solve it. It suggests there is a structural discontinuity, a break in the invariant pattern of animal life, that materialist gradualism simply cannot account for.
Or it suggests that our definitions of culture are too narrow. But I want to pivot because your source material takes this argument to a place that is even more controversial than biology. You want to talk about energy itself. And you are proposing rewriting E equals mc squared.
Not rewriting. Contextualizing. And this brings us to the absolute deepest level of structure. The advocate represents the view that energy is not some free-floating fluid. It is spectral geometry.
Okay, you need to unpack that. Because to a physicist, E equals mc squared is sacred ground. You don't just mess with it.
Think of the boiling point analogy. At sea level, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. On Mount Everest, where the pressure is lower, it boils at 70 degrees. The constraint, the atmospheric pressure, rewrites the energy threshold for the phase transition.
Right, that is basic thermodynamics.
Now apply that to the vacuum. We usually think of the vacuum as empty space, but quantum mechanics tells us it is a choir of modes. Fluctuations. My argument is that boundaries, like the plates in a Casimir experiment, act exactly like the pressure on the mountain. They change the choir. They change the spectrum of allowed modes.
This is the Casimir effect. We know this. Two metal plates pushed together exclude certain wavelengths, and that creates a force. But that is a tiny, specific, measurable effect. You are proposing a topology factor, this chi-t variable, that modifies the rest energy of matter everywhere.
E equals mc squared times chi-t. Yes.
That sounds like you are trying to introduce a fifth force, or modify the speed of light. If you change E equals mc squared, you break Lorentz invariance. You break the very foundation of special relativity. Particle accelerators prove Einstein right to a dozen decimal places every single day. If there was a chi factor, we would have seen it in the collider data.
I see why you think that. But here is the nuance you are missing. Particle accelerators operate in high vacuum, essentially free space. In free space, my topology factor, chi-t, equals 1. So Einstein holds perfectly. I am not touching Einstein in free space.
So where exactly does this factor exist then?
In bounded geometries. In the pressure cooker of distinct topology. The argument is that Einstein's formula is the asymptotic limit. It is what happens when there are no walls. But real matter, real systems, exist in geometric constraints. Nanoscale environments, toroidal structures.
But wait, are you saying that if I put an electron inside a tiny cavity, its actual mass changes?
I am saying its effective energy accounting changes. Energy is spectral. It depends entirely on the available modes. If geometry restricts those modes, just like the Casimir plates restrict wavelengths, then the energy density must shift.
But energy is conserved. You can't just make it disappear or appear because you built a tiny box.
Exactly. It is conserved. But the expression of that energy, the density, the threshold, is geometry conditioned, just like the boiling water. The heat required changes because the constraint changed. The vacuum energy density changes because the geometry changed. It is honest bookkeeping. If you ignore the geometry, you are using the wrong ledger entirely.
That is a clever argument, I will admit. But have you considered the equivalence principle? Gravity treats all energy the same. If you start saying energy depends on the shape of the container, you're skating very, very close to violating general relativity. Gravity doesn't care about your spectral modes. It cares about mass energy.
But general relativity is geometry. That is the great irony here. Gravity is the ultimate constraint. My point is that we have separated these fields. We have thermodynamics handling pressure constraints. We have the Casimir effect handling boundary constraints. And we have gravity handling metric constraints. They are all doing the exact same thing. Constraint writes the spectrum, and the spectrum writes the energy.
So your unified view is that everything, literally everything, is just constraint, spectrum, energy?
Yes, the universe is not a collection of things. It is a structure of constraints.
I have to say, that is elegant, but it feels like a massive philosophical imposition on physics. You want the universe to be one invariant structure so badly, so you interpret quantum mechanics as one world, you interpret biology as broken templates, and you interpret physics as geometric energy. It is a remarkably consistent worldview, I will give you that, but nature is usually much messier than our philosophies.
Well, perhaps nature is cleaner than our approximations. We multiply worlds because we rely on linear algebra instead of geometry. We invent emergence because we rely on gradualism instead of admitting a real discontinuity. We ignore the topology factor because we like the simplicity of free space.
Let's look at where this leaves us. In the conclusion of our sources, there is a brief mention of a quaternary structure.
Yes, this is the synthesis of the whole idea. If you take this view seriously, that light and geometry are fundamental, you start seeing a four-fold pattern everywhere. Space-time is four-dimensional. DNA has four bases. Maxwell's equations are a four-vector system.
Now be careful, this is starting to sound dangerously like numerology. 4 is a useful number, sure, but saying it is the language of light might be bridging physics and metaphysics a bit too aggressively for my taste.
Perhaps. But consider the quaternary note from the source material. It suggests that stability in four dimensions requires a toroidal or ring-like structure, a four-torus. If the universe is a closed geometric structure, as I argued at the start, and if light is the substrate, then everything we see, matter, life, energy, might just be fractal expressions of that one underlying shape.
That is a beautiful poetic image. But as the dissenter, I have to remind our listeners, the standard model works. Evolution works. E equals mc squared works brilliantly. You are asking for a radical restructuring of science based on an intuition of oneness.
And I would argue that the standard model is a phenomenal description of the paint, but it completely misses the canvas. The advocate's position is that we are confusing the index for the territory. The universe does not branch. It does not slide gradually into meaning, and it is not indifferent to geometry.
Well, we agree on the core tension, at least. It is the tension between process and structure, between the messy, multiplying, evolving many, and the singular, invariant, geometric one.
Precisely. And the source material ends with a sentiment I think we can both appreciate, regardless of which side we ultimately take. The universe is never possessed as a whole. It is read from within.
That I can definitely agree with. We are just threads in the fabric, trying to read the pattern while we are woven into it. We really don't have the God's eye view.
No, we don't. But we can see the geometry if we stop looking for the ghosts of other worlds. Thank you for listening to the debate.
Keep questioning the structure.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, you could definitely say that.
Usually we take a specific topic, maybe it's the latest in AI or some obscure slice of history or a new economic theory, and we drill down to the bedrock to see how it works. But today, the topic kind of is the bedrock.
Right. We aren't just talking about the things happening in the world today. We are talking about the world itself. We're talking about reality. With a capital R.
It is the ultimate deep dive, isn't it? Like, we aren't just looking at the furniture in the room. We're looking at the walls, the floor, the foundation, and I guess the zoning laws that allowed the house to be built in the first place.
Exactly. And the source material we have today is, well, it's massive.
It really is. To set the stage for you listening, I want to start with a feeling that I think literally everyone has had. It's just a universal human experience. You make a choice. A big one. Maybe you take a job in Chicago instead of New York. Or you decide to break up with someone you love because it just wasn't working. Or maybe it's smaller. You just turned left on a drive instead of right. And late at night when you can't sleep, you have that thought, What if?
The classic road not taken.
Right. And because we've all been raised on this steady diet of sci-fi movies, comic books, pop science articles, the very next thought that usually pops into our heads is, somewhere in another branch of the multiverse, I did take that job.
Yeah.
I did stay in that relationship. There's a version of me living that exact life right now.
The many worlds interpretation. It's basically become the dominant myth of our modern time. And it's comforting in a weird way.
Right, because it tells you that every possibility is real somewhere.
Exactly. It softens the blow of regret. You didn't really miss out because another you is experiencing it.
It's like a cosmic safety net. But the stack of papers you've brought in for this deep dive, I've got to be honest, it's basically a sledgehammer to that safety net.
Oh, it's a complete demolition project, the whole premise.
We are looking at a massive, interconnected argument today that spans high-level quantum physics, relativity, evolutionary biology, and, strangely enough, ancient theology.
Which is a wild mix, I know.
It is. And the headline is shocking. The multiverse is a lie. Not just unlikely, but physically incoherent. It actively violates the fundamental laws of how the universe is actually constructed.
That is the core claim, yes. The source material argues that we are looking at something called one invariant structure.
One invariant structure.
A single unified reality where what happens actually matters. Precisely because the alternative doesn't happen anywhere.
So our mission today is to walk through this argument step by step. We're going to dismantle the multiverse. We're going to rebuild physics with a new formula for energy that actually challenges Einstein or, at least updates him. We're going to look at why human beings are a total glitch in the evolutionary matrix, and we're going to end up, basically staring into the face of God.
Or at least the face of the null geodesic, but we will get there. It is a journey from the very bottom of physics to the very top of metaphysics.
Let's start with the physics then, part 1. The case against many worlds. The source material accuses us, and by us I mean modern culture, you listening, me, all of us, of committing what they call the container fallacy regarding time. And I felt a little called out by this.
I think we all do when we first read it.
What exactly is the container fallacy?
It's basically the default setting for the human brain. It's how we are wired to survive, but it is fundamentally not how the universe works. If you just close your eyes and picture time, what do you see?
I see a long hallway. Or maybe a river flowing past me.
Right. You probably imagine yourself standing at a specific point called the present. Behind you is this container called the past, and it's filled with stuff that already happened. Ahead of you is an empty container called the future, just waiting to be filled up. And you're walking down this hallway.
Exactly. I move through time, I leave the past, I enter the future. That's just common sense.
That is the fallacy. The source argues that special relativity, literally Einstein's work from over 100 years ago, already killed this idea entirely. But our cultural intuitions just haven't caught up. Time isn't a container you move through. Time is a relational structure. It's a coordinate system.
Okay, that sounds very abstract. Help me visualize the difference. If it's not a hallway we walk down, what is it?
Think of a map. A map has latitude and longitude.
Yeah.
You don't move through latitude, right? Latitude is just a way of describing where you are in relation to the poles.
Okay.
The source argues that time is exactly like that. It's a dimension of what physicists call the block universe. The past, present, and future exist as a single geometric object. You don't walk through it. You are a structure embedded within it.
So the me of 10 years ago is just as real as the me sitting right here talking to you, just at a different coordinate.
Precisely. Just like New York is just as real as London, even if you are currently sitting in London.
Wow.
Now, let's apply this perspective to the multiverse. Because the source uses a very simple thought experiment to crack the many worlds idea wide open. The coin flip.
I really liked this part. It's so grounded. You have a quarter. You flip it.
Right. Let's slow it way down. You flip the coin. It spins in the air. Gravity acts on it. Angular momentum acts on it. It hits your palm. You slap it onto the back of your hand. You lift your hand.
It's heads.
Okay. I see heads. I remember seeing heads.
In the mini-world's view, the multiverse view, what happened at that exact split second?
The universe split. Or it branched.
Right. According to that theory, the entire universe physically duplicated. A U in branch A saw heads. Another U in branch B saw tails. Both are equally real. Both are sovereignly duplicated. There is now twice as much you, twice as much Earth, twice as much universe.
So there are two timelines now, two hallways branching off from that single point in space. But the source asks you to do something difficult here. Imagine you could zoom out and look at that event from the outside, structurally. Do you see two geometries tearing apart? Does the mass of the universe suddenly double to accommodate this new world?
Well, no, I just see one coin, one force of gravity, one observer.
Exactly. The source argues that this branching is a pure mathematical fiction. It is an artifact of how we describe probability, not a description of physical reality. And this brings us to what is arguably the most important word of this entire deep dive, invariance.
Invariance, yeah, it sounds like something from a contract law textbook or a sci-fi shield. Engage the invariance field.
It really does, but it's actually the most important concept in modern physics. If you want to know what is real, you have to ask what is invariant.
Define that for us. What does it mean?
Invariance is the standard by which physical reality is constrained. It means what is the thing that absolutely does not change no matter who is looking at it or how fast they're moving or what angle they view it from.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about a train. This is Einstein's classic example. Let's say I'm on a train moving at 100 miles an hour. I pour a cup of coffee. To me, inside the train, the coffee goes straight down into the cup. Its horizontal speed is 0.
Right, you don't see the coffee flying backwards into your face.
Exactly. But to you, standing on the platform watching the train zoom by, that exact same stream of coffee is moving horizontally at 100 miles an hour.
True.
So we disagree on the speed. We totally disagree on the path it took through space. If we base our reality purely on velocity, we live in different worlds, we have conflicting facts. But Einstein asked, what do we agree on? What is invariant?
And that's the space-time interval, right?
Correct. We might disagree on the space measurements, and we might even disagree on the time measurements if the train is going fast enough. But if we combine them into a single four-dimensional measurement, we get the exact same number. That number is the invariant truth. That number is real. Everything else is just perspective.
Okay, I totally get it for trains and coffee, but how does this kill the multiverse?
The source applies this exact rigorous standard to quantum mechanics. The multiverse proponents look at the wave function, the mathematical description of a quantum particle, and they see all these different possibilities or branches. And they say, look at all these worlds. They must all literally exist.
But the source says...
The source says, no, look closer. Those branches change depending on how you slice the data. They depend entirely on your coordinate system. They depend on something called coarse graining. If you change the way you measure the system, the branches themselves change.
And if it changes when you change your perspective?
Then it is not invariant. It's not fundamental. It's a shadow. It's a projection. The source argues there is only one invariant object in quantum mechanics, and that is the universal wave function itself. It doesn't split. It doesn't branch. It just evolves as a single unified whole. The many worlds are just a grid we draw over it to make sense of the complexity.
That's actually a huge relief. Thinking about billions of versions of me making slightly different breakfast choices is just exhausting.
It is exhausting.
But there's a darker side to the multiverse too, isn't there? Because the text spends a lot of time on this concept called foreclosure.
Yes. This is where we move slightly from pure physics into philosophy or existentialism. Foreclosure basically means the closing of the gate. For a decision to be real, for a moment to have actual weight and meaning, something has to not happen.
Right. Like if I choose to marry a specific person, the poignancy of that choice, the whole beauty of it is that I am by definition not marrying anyone else. I am actively closing that door. I am foreclosing that possibility.
Exactly. Determination requires exclusion. The very definition of deciding is to cut off the alternatives. But in the many worlds interpretation, what happens?
I marry person A in this branch, and I marry person B in that branch.
And you stay single in a third branch.
Yeah.
And you move to Peru and become a monk in a fourth. Everything happens. The gate literally never closes.
So in a way, I never actually made a choice at all.
Precisely. The source argues that the multiverse destroys the very concept of determination. It calls it ontological inflation.
Ontological inflation, that's a great term.
It is. Imagine an economy where the government prints infinite money. Trillions of dollars every single second. What happens to the value of a single dollar bill?
It goes to zero. It just becomes worthless paper.
Right. The multiverse prints infinite reality. Every possible event happens somewhere. So the value, the weight, the actual meaning of any specific event drops to absolute zero. If everything happens, nothing matters.
It creates what the text calls a probability bind, right?
Yes. Think about it. Probability is inherently a measure of uncertainty. If I say there's a 50% chance it'll rain, that implies it might not rain. But if it rains in world A and it absolutely doesn't rain in world B, and both are equally real, what does 50% chance even mean anymore?
Yeah, you are guaranteed to experience both outcomes across your aggregate selves.
Exactly. Probability totally dissolves. It becomes a meaningless concept.
So by trying to preserve all the possibilities, the multiverse actually makes them all completely meaningless. That is a really powerful takedown.
It is. It frames the multiverse not as this incredible scientific breakthrough, but as a failure of nerve. We are afraid to admit that reality is singular and exclusive. We want to keep all our options open, forever. But the universe just doesn't work like that.
Okay, so we've established that the multiverse is likely a mathematical illusion that robs human life of meaning. We are back to one universe, one invariant structure.
Yeah.
But then this is a really big, but the source says our current understanding of physics is missing a massive piece of the puzzle regarding energy within this one universe.
Yes. This is part 2 of our deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to warn you listening, this is going to sound radical. We are about to discuss an update to literally the most famous equation in human history.
It sounds incredibly arrogant, doesn't it? Like, hey, Einstein, you missed a spot. But the source is claiming that E equals mc squared is what, incomplete?
Not incomplete, exactly, but
Okay.
specific. The source argues that E equals mc squared is a limit case. It describes energy in free space.
Free space.
Right. Imagine a vacuum with absolutely no walls, no boundaries, no nearby planets, no gravity wells, just an infinite, empty, featureless void.
But we don't live in an infinite, empty void. We live in a universe full of stuff. There are planets, stars, black holes, people.
Exactly. We live in a geometry, we live in a topology. So the source proposes a new, more generalized formula. E equals mc squared multiplied by chi t.
Chi tea. It sounds like a specialized, very expensive tea blend. Break down chi tea for us. What does it actually represent?
It stands for the topology factor. Topology is basically the mathematical study of shapes, connectedness, and boundaries. Essentially, this factor, chi t, represents how the physical shape of the space you are in actively changes the energy allowed inside it.
Okay, I really need an analogy here. I'm not a quantum physicist. How can a shape change energy? How does the container change the contents?
The source uses a brilliant analogy, one that anyone who cooks will instantly understand. Boiling water.
Okay, let's head to the kitchen.
You're in your kitchen at sea level. The atmospheric pressure is 1 bar. You put a pot of water on the stove. You turn on the heat. At what temperature does it boil?
100 degrees Celsius, or 212 Fahrenheit.
Right. That is the exact energy threshold required for that specific phase transition to turn the liquid into a gas. The pressure of the atmosphere, the constraint of the air literally pushing down on the water, sets that rule.
Got it.
Now magically teleport that exact same stove to the top of Mount Everest.
Okay, I'm freezing. The air is super thin. The pressure is much lower.
You turn on the stove. That exact same pot of water will now boil at about 70 degrees Celsius.
Wait, really? It's that huge of a difference?
Yes, it's a massive difference. That's why baking instructions are different at high altitudes. The water boils sooner in terms of the energy input required. Now look closely at the water molecules. Did they change?
No, it's the exact same water, same H2O.
Did the fire change?
No.
The constraint changed. The environment literally wrote the rules for the energy. The source says, constraint writes the energy ledger. The geometry of the atmosphere determined the energy dynamics of the water.
I see. So on Everest, the geometry of the air column above you is different, so the energy required to make the water transition is different.
Exactly. Now take that concept that constraint determines energy and apply it to the vacuum of space itself.
But the vacuum is empty, isn't it?
Quantum mechanics tells us the vacuum is definitely not empty. It's frothing with potential energy. We call it the zero-point energy, or the quantum foam. Waves are popping in and out of existence constantly, everywhere, all the time.
Okay, so space is practically alive with activity.
Now imagine those waves are a choir singing in a giant cathedral.
I like this, a cosmic choir.
If you are in a massive open field, which is free space, the choir can sing absolutely any note. Bass, soprano, super low, super high, they have an infinite range.
That's free space.
But now, shove that exact same choir into a really small, weirdly shaped room, a cavity, or between 2 closely spaced walls. Suddenly, the really low bass notes literally don't fit in the room. The acoustics of the geometry physically dampen certain frequencies. They aren't allowed to exist there.
So the geometry of the room silences parts of the choir.
Yes, the spectral density, which is the physicist's term for the list of allowed songs, changes. And since those waves are literal energy, the geometry has fundamentally changed the energy density of that space. That change, that shift in the allowed notes, is chi t.
This sounds conceptually plausible, but is it real? Or is it just clever math on a whiteboard? Do we have actual proof that walls change vacuum energy?
We do. It is absolutely verifiable. We call it the Casimir effect. This is the smoking gun for this entire physical theory.
Describe it for us. What is the Casimir effect?
If you take two perfectly uncharged metal plates in a hard vacuum and put them unimaginably close together, like mere microns apart, they will physically push towards each other.
Without any magnets, without gravity causing it.
Without any of that. Just the vacuum itself doing the pushing. Why? Because the choir outside the plates is singing all the notes, pushing in on the plates from the outside. But the choir between the plates is heavily restricted. The big waves can't fit. So there's literally less vacuum pressure inside the gap than outside it.
So the universe just crushes them together because they created a constraint.
Exactly. The geometry, the physical presence of the plates altered the baseline vacuum energy. The source argues a huge leap here. If it happens between two tiny plates in a lab, it happens everywhere. Every atom, every planet, every galaxy is a geometry that constrains the vacuum.
So E equals mc squared is just the baseline. It's the open field formula. Real reality, the reality of stuff and shapes and planets, is E equals mc squared chi t. The chi t is the adjustment for the shape of the universe. It's basically telling us that space isn't just an empty stage.
Correct. And this matters immensely because it unifies physics in a new way. It stops treating space as a passive backdrop where things happen and starts treating it as an active participant. Space squeezes matter, matter shapes space. It's a continuous, invariant feedback loop.
The text does mention a hostile referee, though. Someone who reviews this paper and says, hey, wait a minute, you're breaking the core rules of relativity.
Right. The standard objection from traditional physicists is that energy flow speed is relative. If you move fast, the speed of things around you seems to change. So how can you base a fundamental invariant formula on something that changes depending on how fast you're going?
Yeah, that seems like a problem.
But the source refines the theory beautifully here. It says, look, this isn't about the speed of flow. It's about spectral density.
Back to the choir.
Yes. The actual number of allowed notes in that room doesn't change just because you happen to run past the cathedral. The acoustics are a structural property of the geometry itself, not your relative speed. That makes chi t totally robust. It's Lorentz invariant. It holds up mathematically against relativity.
Okay, so we've unified the universe into one structure, and we've updated the energy formula to include geometry and constraint. But now the source material is a very sharp left turn. It leaves the vacuum of space, and it looks at us, the monkeys wearing shoes.
The evolutionary discontinuity.
This part really stuck with me. I mean, I love evolutionary biology. I love the idea that we are deeply connected to the animal kingdom. But the source makes an observation here that really challenges that comfort. It calls it behavioral template preservation.
It's a mouthful of a phrase, but the concept is brilliantly simple. Evolution is inherently conservative. It strongly prefers to keep things that already work. It very rarely reinvents the wheel.
Give me an example of that.
Look at a dog. Let's take a Chihuahua.
My neighbor has one. It's an absolute terror.
It's this tiny trembling thing that lives in a designer purse. Physically, structurally, it looks almost nothing like a gray wolf. Evolution and human breeding have warped its body shape completely over thousands of years. But behaviorally, watch it closely. What does it actually do?
Well, it circles on the rug before it lies down. It pees on things to mark territory.
It deeply understands pack hierarchy. It yaps at the mailman like he's a rival wolf encroaching on the ancestral den. The wolf template is fully intact. Evolution aggressively changed the hardware, but it kept the core software completely untouched.
That makes total sense.
The source points out this is true everywhere you look. Cats act exactly like lions. They squawk, they pounce, they groom themselves. Whales, which have been in the ocean for 50 million years, still act fundamentally like land mammals. They nurse their young, they form intense social bonds, they play. They didn't revert to behaving like sharks just because they moved into the water.
Even birds. They act like reptiles in a lot of ways. High aggression, rigid territoriality.
The behavioral substrate vigorously persists across millions of years until you get to humans.
And this is the discontinuity, because the standard model says we are just smart apes.
Correct. The standard evolutionary story is that we are simply primates that got a massive RAM upgrade. Bigger brains, better processing power, opposable thumbs. But if that were strictly true, we should still be acting precisely like apes, just better, more efficient apes.
We should just have super dominance hierarchies. We should be having super grooming sessions.
Exactly. We should be communicating entirely in want and fear signals, Give me banana, run from snake, mate with me.
But we don't do that. We have something that has absolutely no precedent in the entire animal kingdom. We have symbolic culture.
And I want to be really clear here because people get this infused. The source rigorously distinguishes between social learning and symbolic culture.
What's the fundamental difference? Because chimps definitely learn, right? They use sticks to fish for termites. They teach their kids to do it.
That is pure utility. The chimp learns how to do a physical action to get a physical result. That's mimicry. But human culture is deeply symbol-mediated and norm-governed.
Break that down for me. Norm-governed. What does that mean in practice?
Take the concept of justice or human rights. Can you point to a right in the physical world? Can you go into the forest and dig up a bucket of justice?
No! They are total abstractions. They don't exist physically anywhere.
And yet, we organize our entire global reality around them. An ape understands, I am physically stronger than you, so I take the food. That is the bounds of physical reality. A human understands, I am stronger than you, but I ought not to take the food because it belongs to you.
That is a total abstraction. It's a completely invented rule that overrides basic physical reality.
It binds us. We feel ought. We feel we should do something even if it actively hurts our physical survival. An ape doesn't have ought. It only has is and want.
And the source mentions our obsession with counterfactuals, too.
Yes. We spend half our lives talking about things that do not exist. We discuss, what if I hadn't eaten breakfast? Or, what if unicorns were real? We live in a world of symbols that floats completely above the biological substrate.
So the argument here is that this isn't just a gradual, gentle slope from ape to human. It's a cliff. We jumped off the animal behavior track entirely.
It's a literal phase transition, just like water boiling. The source argues that standard evolutionary mechanisms, random mutation, natural selection, explain the biological hardware perfectly. They explain our hands, our eyes, our adrenaline responses, but they fundamentally fail to explain the sudden, incredibly sharp appearance of symbolic meaning. It's like we abruptly switched operating systems from animal bios to symbolic windows.
So if evolution didn't gradually build that bridge, what it did?
The source suggests this gap implies a whole new level of organization entered the picture. Just like geometric topology constrains energy in the physics section we just talked about, something fundamentally new, a new design principle constrained biological matter to produce the symbolic mind.
And that perfectly leads us to the wildest part of this deep dive, the grand synthesis. Because the source claims there is a specific mathematical pattern that ties the physics, the biology, and even the theology totally together. The number 4.
The quaternary principle.
Now, I have to be completely honest with you. Usually when I hear someone say, the number 4 is the secret key to the universe, my numerology alarm bells go crazy. It sounds like something you'd hear at a crystal shop right next to the incense. But the actual physical examples the source brings up here are, well, they're stubborn.
They are very stubborn.
Yeah.
This isn't magic numbers. It is structural analysis. And it starts with light. The source states plainly, light is quaternary.
Fourfold. How is light fourfold?
Think about what light actually is, mathematically speaking. It's an electromagnetic wave.
Okay.
You have an electric field, that's 1. You have magnetic field, that's 2. They oscillate perpendicular to each other.
Right.
Then you have the direction of propagation, the vector of where the light is actually going, that's 3. And finally, you have the frequency, which represents the time component, that's 4.
Okay, so the core structure of light itself requires exactly 4 distinct coordinates or components to be fully described.
Right. And the deep math of this is called quaternions. It's a complex number system discovered in the 19th century that fundamentally relies on 4 components. It turns out quaternions are the native mathematical language of special relativity and electromagnetism. If you want to speak the language of light, you have to speak in 4s.
Okay, so light is a 4-part structure, fine. But then the source jumps straight from photons to DNA.
And this is where the massive aha moment hits.
Yeah.
DNA, the fundamental code of all biological life. It's the instruction manual for every living thing on Earth. How is it written?
ATCG. The 4 bases. Adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine.
Exactly 4, not 2. Our human computers use binary 0 and 1. It's highly efficient. But life doesn't use binary. It doesn't use 3. It uses 4.
And the source argues this isn't just some random chemical accident from a primordial soup.
It actively argues that DNA is light organizing itself at a biological scale.
Whoa. Slow down. DNA is light.
At the most fundamental level, what is solid matter? What are atoms? They are essentially electromagnetic fields bound together. Electrons, protons, it's all captured light or standing waves of energy. The source argues that when this energy organizes into complex information into the master code of life, it naturally uses the exact same alphabet as the substrate it's made of.
So because light has a four-part structure, the life made out of that light necessarily has a four-part structure.
Precisely. It's a fractal. The pattern continuously repeats at different scales. The quaternary signature is permanently stamped on reality.
And the source mentions a specific shape, the four torus.
But that is the ultimate shape of this structure. A torus is a donut shape. A four torus is a highly complex donut that constantly circulates in 4 dimensions, including time. The source describes this as the only genuinely stable, self-sustaining mathematical form for energy. If you want free energy to stick around and become stable matter, it has to loop back on itself perfectly. It has to be a four torus.
So atoms are basically little four tori.
Essentially, yes. And so is a galaxy. And so is the universe itself. Its toruses all the way down, and they are all fundamentally built on this quaternary fourfold logic.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most controversial part of this massive stack of papers, the theology. Because the source does not just leave this as a really cool physics theory, it actively claims this one invariant structure we've been talking about is, well, God.
But importantly, not in the old man with a beard in the sky sense. It rigorously treats theology as ontological physics. It takes the statement from the ancient text of 1 John chapter 1, verse 5, God is light.
And it takes that literally.
Not literally as in God is a literal photon you can catch in a prism, but literally as in God is the absolute fundamental substrate. The source draws a critical distinction here between the null geodesic and the time-like geodesic.
Okay, expert mode engaged. Translate that for us.
In relativity, a null geodesic is the exact path that light takes through spacetime. And here is the most mind-bending fact about light. Light experiences absolutely no time.
Zero time.
Zero. If you were a photon, the exact moment you are emitted from a star in the Andromeda galaxy and the exact moment you hit a telescope lens on Earth 2 million years later are the exact same moment. Proper time is zero.
So for light, everything that will ever happen is happening now.
An eternal present. The source deeply identifies this null geodesic perspective with the divine perspective. God is the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end simultaneously. Because from the perspective of light, emission and absorption are one single event.
That is beautiful and a little terrifying to try and conceptualize.
And then there is us. We are time-like, we have mass, we move much slower than light, so we experience separation, we experience the gap between alpha and omega, we experience time ticking.
So the universe creation itself is a time-like bubble existing entirely within the null framework of God.
Exactly. The source calls it the cosmic Casimir cavity. Remember the plates from earlier?
Yes, the constraint that changed the energy.
Right. Just like the plates in the lab create a bounded space for certain waves, the alpha of creation and the omega of consummation create the absolute boundaries of the universe. Time exists between those boundaries.
So the phrase in the beginning isn't just a date on a cosmic calendar.
The source points out the original Hebrew word is bereshit, which can actually be translated as with beginning. Time is a created internal structure. It's the furniture inside the room. It's not the room itself. God doesn't sit on a timeline waiting for things to unfold. God is the boundary condition that allows the timeline to exist in the first place.
And what about the darkness? Genesis 1:2 says darkness was upon the face of the deep. Usually people think of darkness in these texts as evil or scary or the absence of God.
But in this new physical framework, if matter is energy, E equals mc squared, and energy is fundamentally light, then the earth that was formless and void was actually just unrevealed light.
Unrevealed light, what does that mean?
Think about the quantum wave function we discussed in part 1. Before you measure a particle, it's just a probability cloud. It's dark to you. It hasn't been observed into a state yet. The source says the command, let there be light, wasn't the creation of the first photon out of nothing. It was the very first nucleation, the very first observation.
The first collapse of the cosmic wave function?
Yes. God observes the unrevealed potential, the tehom, the deep, and it immediately becomes manifest reality. Darkness isn't evil here. It is just the not yet. It is the infinite reservoir of God's power. that hasn't been collapsed into a specific thing yet.
So darkness is just the not yet observed. It's pure potential.
Exactly. And that radically reframes the entire creation story. It's not about magically making stuff out of empty nothingness. It's about revealing order out of infinite potential. It's about nucleating physical coordinates in the darkness.
It is a lot to process, but when you zoom all the way out, it hangs together in this really startling, beautiful way. We started with the multiverse.
Which fragments reality into infinite meaningless copies of itself.
And we completely replaced it with one invariant structure.
A single unified geometric whole where choices matter.
We saw how geometry, through Chi-T, literally rewrites the rules of energy. The container actively shapes the content.
Which perfectly explains why the physical world looks and behaves the way it does.
We saw how humans completely broke the animal mold with symbolic culture.
A sudden new level of organization. A totally new constraint on biology.
We saw the quaternary fourfold signature of light stamped right into our DNA, the ultimate fractal fingerprint.
And finally, we conceptualized God not as a distant being, but as the null geodesic framework holding the entire time-like universe together.
It's a synthesis that fundamentally restores meaning. In the multiverse view, you are just one of infinite random accidents. But in this invariant view, you are a necessary, specific thread in a single, perfectly coherent tapestry.
The source actually calls the universe a closed egg.
A self-contained, resonating whole.
And the final thought the author leaves us with in the text is really haunting. It says, "We are not fragments in a multiverse. We are threads reading the one light from within."
That is the ultimate takeaway. We are inside the text. We are the literal mechanism by which the light reads itself.
Well said.
But, thinking about that, if we are the light reading itself, that means human attention isn't just a passive thing.
What do you mean?
Well, if observation collapses the wave function, like we talked about with nucleation, then every single time you genuinely pay attention to something, you aren't just looking at the world. You are actively participating in the ongoing creation of it. Your consciousness is literally a physical force holding the invariant structure together.
Wow. That implies that a lack of attention, a distraction, is almost a form of physical entropy.
Exactly. Something to think about the next time you're doom scrolling instead of looking at the person right in front of you. So, to everyone listening, next time you look at the sun or just look at your own hand, remember, it's all the exact same stuff. It's all light. It's all invariant. And you are here to witness it.
We are the observers.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I'm going to go stare at a light bulb for a while and rethink my entire existence. We'll see you next time.